Times were tough in the Great Depression. I think of this time period often. People were rationed on what items they could get for their large families and had to use what they had on hand. There was no waste because they were so resourceful, not out of want, but out of need. I actually really enjoy the weeks when I decide that I am just going to cook from the pantry and use what we already have on hand. When I implement this strategy, I often find that we have more than enough to make from scratch meals for the week, and no extra is truly needed. So let's get into the kitchen and use what we have in our pantries together. I've been wanting to try out these sorghum cookies for a while now. My mom went down to Muddy Pond, Tennessee in the fall and watched them make sorghum, and she brought me back a really big jug of it. This recipe for sorghum cookies is actually on the back of the sorghum bottle. I love that they incorporate ginger and other spices. They taste similar to a sugar cookie, but the sweetness is from the sorghum. Sorghum is also a superfood and is really good to add into oatmeal, granola, yogurt, etc. Some pantry items that are needed to make these sorghum cookies include all-purpose flour, salt, baking soda, ginger, cloves, cinnamon, eggs, sorghum sugar shortening, and butter. I've been thinking about compiling a big list of pantry items that I keep on hand so that you all could download it and use it to stock your pantries. These would be items that I generally use in cooking from scratch recipes. Please let me know in the comments if that would be useful for you. It's important to remember that when making cookies or breads, you always want to mix your dry ingredients and your wet ingredients separately. It may sound like common knowledge to most of us, but if you're new to cooking, this is a very helpful tip. In order to make these cookies, I started by mixing together 4 cups of plain all-purpose flour, half a teaspoon of salt, 2 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of ground ginger, 1 1/2 teaspoon of ground cloves, and 1 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Then I moved on to the wet ingredients, and when starting out the base of any cookie, you're going to start by creaming together the butter and sugar, which just means mixing those together first. And you will need half a cup of butter or 1 stick, which is 8 tablespoons of butter. I always keep salted butter on hand, so that is what I used in this recipe. So you're going to cream in your shortening. After you've creamed together your butter, sugar, cream together your shortening as well, and you'll need half a cup of that. Finally, you will add in a half a cup of sorghum and 2 eggs. I used 1 tablespoon sized balls for the cookies, and I dipped them in sugar and then baked them in a 350-degree oven for 11 minutes. And this recipe makes about 3 dozen. I love these cookies so much. I love having them in the morning with my coffee, and they really do help settle your stomach. I love versatility when it comes to cooking and making the same items but just switching up a few ingredients. Cornbread, biscuits, and breads are so easy to switch up. You can change your biscuit recipe slightly just to include some garlic and cheddar. You can make a banana bread or a spicy jalapeno bread. Cornbread is what I am making with this meal, and I added in corn, diced tomatoes with green chilies, and shredded cheddar cheese. Just a few simple ingredients, and it completely elevates regular cornbread to something super yummy and perfect to add into any soup. For this night's supper, I was actually making a ground venison vegetable soup, and I wanted the zestiness of this cornbread to add into the soup. The cornbread really helped the soup be more filling and satisfying. I go back and forth between using self-rising cornmeal and just regular cornmeal. This was a very simple recipe to throw together though, and I love simple side items that have a big impact on meals or that make kind of more plain meals or soups feel like they taste a little bit better and they are more filling. I like a thicker soup, and so anytime I can add cornbread or homemade dumplings or even biscuits to the side or in the soup, I think it makes a huge difference. If you would like to make this cornbread, you will need 1 cup of yellow cornmeal, 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 cup of milk, 2 eggs beaten, 2 cups of shredded cheddar cheese, 1 can of diced tomatoes and green chilies, and 1 can of kernel corn. And then you will combine all of your dry ingredients, add in your wet ingredients, and then you will bake it in a cast iron skillet, a greased cast iron skillet, at 425 for 15 to 20 minutes. I love to make soup in the wintertime. Any meal that can be thrown together with whatever I have on hand makes me happy and life a little easier. We had different vegetables that needed to be used, like carrots and celery, onion, garlic, and potatoes. And then we had a ton of ground venison, and we still have plenty of ground venison where my husband and my oldest son killed deer this fall. So this ground venison vegetable soup was super easy to make. I started the soup by browning the deer meat, and then I added in a little bit of flour and seasonings, and then I added in 4 cups of beef broth. I chopped the onion, carrot, celery, and potatoes and garlic, and I threw all those in and brought it up to a simmer. Then I made a roux with butter and flour and cheese and milk and added that into the soup and allowed it to simmer for 10 to 15 minutes just to get it a little bit thicker. It was a nice, warm, delicious soup on a bitterly cold day with some cheddar cornbread, and it was the perfect supper for this night. I have been longing for all of the hearty meals this winter with delicious warm soups and buttery biscuits and sausage gravy. I love making this for breakfast and for supper, both, but the kids always seem to want this in the mornings, so I was making this up for them. I love making my biscuits from scratch, and I decided to try something a little different this morning with my cold butter. Usually I just use Crisco in the biscuits, but I had a lot of extra butter on hand, and so I used my cheese grater and grated the butter into the flour. I just lightly mixed it in to the self-rising flour with my hands, and these biscuits turned out so buttery and delicious, and so I 100% approve of that method for getting the perfect buttery texture just right in your biscuits. I don't really measure exactly the right proportions every single time that I'm making biscuits, but generally if I'm making a larger batch of biscuits, I do 4 cups of self-rising flour, and then in this recipe I did grate 2 whole sticks of salted butter into my biscuits. And then I did not measure my buttermilk at all, but I just kind of go off of the texture of what my dough is feeling like, and it was a little bit more wet, but it worked out really well. And I actually ended up having some extra biscuit dough that I used to make some fried apple pies. So I'm also going to show you all how I made those fried apple pies. But whenever I'm cutting my biscuits, I just use a really large mason jar, just a wide mouth mason jar, and I dip it in the flour so that the biscuits don't stick. And then I cram it all into a large cast iron skillet that I have greased with Crisco, and I bake it in a 450 degree oven for about 10 to 12 minutes. The larger the biscuit, like these were a little bit bigger and closer together, it took more like 12 minutes. And I left it, and like the last minute I just watched it to see how brown the tops of my biscuits were getting. And then when I take them out, I always get a stick of butter, or I melt butter and pour over top, and it just gives it that delicious buttery flavor. Of course, I add butter whenever I'm making biscuits and gravy. I add it to the inside, and it's just so delicious. Like I said before, when I was growing up, my mom made breakfast for supper all the time, and one of the things that she always let me do was stir the gravy. And so it's so funny now, I make gravy all the time. It's one of my kids' most favorite meals is biscuits and gravy, and so I feel like I make it probably 3 times at least a week, it seems like. So I do add a little bit of butter into, after this is regular sausage gravy, so it's not just plain white gravy. This is a sausage gravy. Sometimes I make it the gravy with sausage in, sometimes I just make plain white gravy using the leftover grease, but I was making the regular sausage gravy, and so I brown my sausage, add in a whole stick of butter, then I add in all-purpose flour, and I let that all come together and cook. And then I add in my raw milk and bring it up to a little bit of a simmer, and it thickens up, and you can see the outcome there. And then of course we have biscuits and eggs with our breakfast. Leftover biscuit dough is perfect for making fried apple pies. So if you ever make homemade biscuits, don't throw your extra dough away. Use it for this. It is so delicious. So I had, like I said, this leftover dough. I had popped it into the refrigerator, and I think this was the next day that I was making the fried apple pies. And so I just roll it out super thin, and I had some homemade apple jam already in my pantry, and so I will link that video either below or up above for you all to watch how I made the apple jam. And that is the filling that I used for the fried apple pies. And so I just filled it in, and they're not perfect or proportional at all. I just kind of made little pockets that kind of reminded me of how you would make a Pop-Tart, and folded them over and used the fork to kind of secure them. And then I brushed the top of them with an egg wash, and I fried them in a cast iron skillet. I think sometimes we overcomplicate recipes, but it just is so funny to me that you can just use this leftover biscuit dough and throw whatever you have, even if you didn't have apple jam. Maybe you had strawberry jam, maybe you had some other type of really delicious filling that you could throw in here, but it is just a few minutes really is all it took, and it was using what we had on hand and not having a lot of waste. And so, like I was talking about, I was trying really hard, and some of my favorite weeks of cooking are the weeks where I don't really have anything planned out. I just am creative and think about different things and try to use what we have in the pantry. And so that was what I was doing this whole entire week, was cooking from the pantry and using what we had on hand and trying not to have a lot of waste or a lot of leftovers. Honestly, we really don't have much waste here in our kitchen and in our home, because my husband will either take leftovers with him to work for lunch, or we will eat the leftovers here where we're home so often for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. And so I feel like that we do a pretty good job of not wasting food. But all of these recipes are just so simple, and those are the recipes that I really love, and that's what I really want other people to learn how to make, because they're simple ingredients. Most people can get these fairly easily and throw them together, and it's cost effective and it feeds a large family, especially whenever you add in biscuits or cornbread, or you do soups, and you can stretch food very far, and you can use leftovers for casseroles and all of those different things. And so I love that about cooking from scratch so much, and that's what I hope to share. Chicken and dumpling is just one of those classic recipes that I feel like we do make on repeat here at our house. We have tons of chicken where we process our own meat birds here on our farm, and I'll link that video below as well. But we had some chicken breasts thawed and ready to go. I cooked them in my Instant Pot with a little bit of some good buttery poultry seasoning, salt and pepper. Instant Pot cooks them so well that they just fall apart and they're easy to shred, and I really like using the shredded chicken breast in chicken and dumplings. Sometimes I'll do the thighs. I like those too because they have a different flavor, and when I do use chicken thighs, I usually brown them on both sides to just give a little bit of a good flavor. But for this particular time I was making chicken and dumplings, I was just using the breast because it's what we had already thawed and ready to go. And so, like I said, I cooked those in the Instant Pot, shredded them. To get my roux going for the base of the soup, I did butter, flour, seasoning, and just kind of let that cream together, then added in milk and chicken broth. And then I added the chicken in, put a little bit more seasonings, and then I made some really simple drop dumplings. Sometimes I'll do roll out dumplings, but this time I just did drop dumplings, and they were super delicious. I am so excited because my mom, my aunt, me, and my daughter are all going up to Ohio for my sweet cousin's baby shower, and I can't wait to hopefully get a video together of all of that, because I'm going to do the cake and cupcakes, and I can't wait to share that with y'all as well. But I wanted to make something a little bit special for her. We did get her just another gift too, but I wanted something that was handmade. I think anytime that you're gonna bring a sweet baby into the world, just making something by hand, just even if that's not the whole gift, even if it's just part of the gift, I think there's just a sentimental factor of making something by hand for a baby shower gift. And so I wanted to throw together something simple and fast that I knew I wouldn't mess up. And so I made a couple of little burp cloths. They could even be used as washcloths for a baby, but they are meant to be burp cloths. And so I did a square burp cloth and a rectangular burp cloth with this 100% cotton fabric, and I loved the design, the beautiful flowers, and my cousin, one of her favorite colors is green, and so I picked the different greens, and then of course it had to have some pink in there because she's having a little girl. And so I did the pretty floral fabric, and then I did the cotton. It's basically just a large dish towel that I cut and then I sewed together, so that would be the back and that would absorb whatever she needs for the burp cloth. And so it was a very simple little sewing project, and I don't get to sew as much as I would like to. I'm a very antsy person, and it takes a lot of just sitting down and measuring and being very precise, which is things that it seems like it takes a lot out of me to do, but I can handle smaller sewing projects, and this one was, like I said, a sentimental project that I knew would mean a lot to her to have something like that that was handmade, and it meant a lot to me to be able to make it for her. I was actually gifted this sewing machine probably 10 years ago. It was right before my son was born, and I had started trying to learn to sew, and so I made him a sweet little stuffed animal and made him a little baby blanket. And I've picked it up through the years just doing different things with sewing, but I have learned some basic techniques, but I'm still using this same just beginner style sewing machine, and I have made like I said, little burp cloths. I've made baby bibs, lots of little baby skirts. I can handle little small projects, and they're so fun. I do love doing sewing projects, so if you all do any kind of sewing, let me know, because if you have any good resources to share, I would love that. It is a really great activity to do this time of year because it's so cold outside, and just staying busy is great. And I've been trying to get my daughter kind of doing a few little sewing projects that she can handle. She's 7, so she'll be 8, so she likes to make little dresses for her Barbie dolls, but I want to get her started on learning to sew as well. For this particular project, I did go ahead and sew all around the edges, and then I turned it inside out. And so if you're new to sewing or don't know much about it, you leave a little bitty hole, and then you're able to flip it inside out. And then once I had flipped it inside out, I was able to go back over and do what's called a top stitch in it, or that's what I'm going to call it, as a top stitch. And so you can, if you were to leave it right here, I'm folding it inside out. If you were to leave it like that, then you wouldn't be able to see any of the thread marks, which is nice for certain sewing projects, but for this one I did decide to do a top stitch. I usually don't. I usually just leave it, but I just thought that it would give it a little bit of extra prettiness to it, and so that's what I did. Anytime that you are doing a sewing project, in a hot iron, an ironing board, or a place to iron your fabric is going to be your very best friend. It has saved me so many times, as well as these little needles that hold together. I know they have sewing clips too, but you can do sewing clips or those little needles that help hold your fabric in place. I consider myself a beginner sewing still, so all of those tips are really helpful for me. Honestly, no one taught me how to sew. I just watched videos and taught myself kind of how to do it, and believe me, I messed up very many times. Like with anything else, I messed up, and I can, like I said, handle small projects, but I haven't ventured off into big projects yet. But this is where I am actually doing the top stitching, and as you can see on the darker fabric, it does give it a pretty little detail on there, and so I was really happy with the way that these turned out. Thank you all so much for sticking around and being patient with me this past week as I got this longer video together, and I'm looking forward to sharing more with you all, and I hope to do kind of some more vlog style videos that don't take me so much time to put together, so I can get them out to you all quicker and easier. So just stay tuned for those, and I hope you all have a wonderful week ahead.